we are happy to start our cooperation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralf. Hello, can everyone hear me properly? Brilliant, thank you. My name is Ben Longman. I'm the founder and managing director of TrendType. We are a UK-based market intelligence company, and we support businesses in the consumer and pharmaceutical sector who are looking to enter African markets. Our background is, from my side, on the market intelligence, and from my business partner side, he has been trading in Africa for about 25 years. So that DNA of our business is about the sort of the analytical methodology and the practical usefulness. The presentation that we will give today is very much an introductory one to help you understand how we think about African markets and perhaps why entering into African markets might be something that is interesting for you. And I think we might end up doing a more detailed presentation later. So what I'll do is I'll just try and share the presentation now. Okay. And hopefully you can all see my screen. So we'll look at, you know, the most attractive grocery retail markets, what that means, and how to think about market attractiveness in Africa. So the opportunity, what is the opportunity in African markets? And the theme of this presentation will be that there is a lot of opportunity, but that opportunity comes with risk. And the first thing that we say to our customers looking into markets in Africa is, you know, you need to understand the risks as well as the opportunity. This is generally a case where it doesn't matter how good your strategy is, your success is dependent on your execution in most markets. So execution is king in most sub-Saharan African markets. You know, the reality is that the most successful brands are the ones who can execute a certain number of things correctly, not necessarily the ones with the best brand awareness or other factors which are important in modern markets. This is why we care about Africa. It's because compared against some some more mature markets, particularly Europe, Germany, you see a much higher growth profile in sub-Saharan Africa. Actually, the reality is that a lot of people look at South Africa and Nigeria, but actually the growth profile of Nigeria and South Africa is a bit lower than other markets like Ethiopia, Kenya, for example. In particular, South Africa has had a very challenging economic climate for 4-5 years now, and with that you are seeing, you know, the improvement in incomes and living standards. In South Africa, that's not really improving that much. So in South Africa we see problems, but we also see the political problems that go alongside that. If you take Nigeria, you know, this growth profile that we're seeing here is very closely related to the price of oil. So again, when you're thinking about oil dependent and mineral dependent markets, it's the price of those commodities that determines the economic attractiveness of the countries. So examples of that would be Algeria, Angola, Gabon, Nigeria, Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, the price of copper for Zambia, but also, and this one is perhaps really interesting, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, its minerals are used in batteries for electric cars, and you know, it's a very high risk country to operate in, but with a very strong growth profile. So this is what we mean by economic growth. It's still across Africa, it's still a higher growth profile than certainly Europe and and the US. It's below, and a long way below, the growth profile of India and China. Okay, so, you know, we're not comparing African markets with India and China. India and China are stratospheric in comparison. But why are African markets so important? And the reason why is because over the next 30 years, Africa will gain 1.2 billion consumers. That's the real story here. It is that the economic growth of African markets is driven by this population engine. And the population engine continues regardless of the underlying economics. So for mass market products, the market is always growing, and you will always have this tension between the growth of the market and the economic growth. So the population growth and the economic growth. Where the population growth is higher than the economic growth, what you actually see is more demand for cheaper products, obviously. And that's true really for most markets. The population growth is higher than the economic growth. So, you know, it's worth bearing that in mind. The point that we would make here is that with the advent of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, with the slowdown in Europe, with the fact that many businesses are already in China and India, Africa is still the next market that people haven't really developed. And it has a very different sort of trend profile to the rest of the world. So this looks at the median age of populations, and you can see in Africa it's 18 across the whole of Africa. In Europe it's 42. If you were to look forward to 2050, the median age in African markets will be maybe 21 years. So it is still going to be an incredibly young and dynamic market, even in 30 years' time. And what that means in practical terms is that particularly products that are aimed at babies, children, the health of babies and children, the growth of babies and children, the nourishment of babies and children are exploding. But even for younger consumers, young adults, these are the most dynamic parts of the market. Very dynamic spirits and beer, extremely dynamic in terms of what people want. Traditionally, when marketers think about generational groups, they might talk about a generational group being 15 to 20 years in years. So millennials, that's a group that encompasses people across an age range of 20 years from start to finish. Baby boomers, 20 years. Generation X, 15 years. In Africa, the marketing generations will be 7 years. So the point to understand here is that every 7 years, you have a new cohort of consumers who potentially see the world in a completely different way. They are more receptive to different brands. They have different tastes. They respond to different messages. So this is a market that is not only growing, but it is reinventing itself for different cohorts every 7 years. So it is very attractive to new entrants that can execute in those markets. So that's who it's particularly interesting for products that are targeted at younger people, young adults, mothers. These are the boom markets because of this number here. The median age is 18. The other thing that is really driving interest in African markets is this phenomenal process of urbanization. So the growth of cities and mega cities in African markets. Over the course of this period between the year 2000 and 2050, the urban population in African markets will grow 5 times over. So just to be clear, in markets like Germany, urbanization is, 85, 90%, about 15, at most 20% of consumers will live in rural areas. These are, very, very highly urbanized markets. In many cases, urbanization rates over sort of 80 to 90%. In some African markets, urbanization rates are 20%. So this extraordinary growth of cities will change the pattern of consumption, but it will also bring hundreds of millions of consumers closer to the markets. So for things like access to electricity, access to shops, the cost of distribution, the access of products to these consumers, and the access of services to these consumers will change, and it's changing, every year. And I've shown on the right hand side the sort of the main countries where the urban populations are larger. So this is a transformational change, and with it, it's not just that the consumers have more choice and more access, but it is also that the economics of these products and services is also changing. In amongst all of this, the lifestyles of consumers are also changing behind the scenes, and the rate of that change depends by country. The most obvious change that we see is the impact of electricity on consumer lifestyles and the impact of connectivity on the way people communicate and the way that they purchase products. And that process of electricity and connectivity are 2 of the fastest moving aspects of consumer lifestyles in Africa. But beneath this, there is tremendous change in terms of manufacturing capacity. There is a huge housing deficit. There are major changes in terms of the supermarket sector, in terms of the media landscape. So right the way across the board, changing lifestyles. And that is changing the pattern of demand for products. And we'll see this a lot, even within the next 5 years. If you were to go to a rural area in Senegal, the product choice will be very limited. If you go back to that same place in 5 years, the product choice will be 10 times larger. And that is mostly to do with the connection between the retailer digitally and his wholesaler. Okay, so these changes aren't just about how consumers watch television or how they switch on a light in their homes, but they are fundamental to the way that they live. Can they refrigerate products? Will they have a cold beer in the evening? What will they want to give their children to eat in the evening? And a nice example of this would be something like the shift from powdered milk to dairy products. The moment consumers have access to electricity in their homes, they can allow their children to study at night, they can buy a refrigerator, they can buy dairy products that are fresher. Their entire lifestyles change just through very small metrics. So right the way across the board, lifestyles are changing more rapidly than anywhere else. And this is true even in South Africa. So 1/3 of consumers in South Africa still have aspects of their lifestyles that are very basic in comparison to the richest people in South Africa. So even in probably the most modernized market in Africa, you still see this huge dynamism for the poorest consumers. I've talked about access to electricity. This is an example here of Rwanda. If you look at the year 2000, fewer than 10% of people in Rwanda have electricity. So 6% of people have electricity, and that means that, you know, no electric lights in their homes, no television, no refrigerator, nothing. The Rwandan government is particularly aggressive in terms of how it wants to develop the lifestyles of and the living standards of people in the country. Potentially, within the next 3 years, every consumer in Rwanda will have access to electricity. Okay, so that's, you know, within the course of 25 years, a major part of you know, what it means to be a person living in Rwanda will be different. So, you know, this is in the background, you can see a picture of Britney Spears. So this is within the context of Britney Spears being young and still considered to be sort of in the middle of her career. So, you know, in that time, Rwanda has gone from having almost no electricity to this aim of 100% electricity. And these activities are happening in Côte d'Ivoire, in Kenya, in Tanzania, Uganda. Everywhere you go, you see this investment into connectivity and electricity. It is two of the largest areas that we see across Africa. So it brings a whole change in the way people consume products. The other thing that we see is an enormous amount of disruption in terms of who is providing the products and who is providing the services. And a lot of that disruption is being driven by digitalization. Digitalization of transport and logistics, the change in the way that utilities are provided through disconnected and remote solar generation, a change in the supply chain with internet-based businesses, digital wholesalers, a change in the way people pay, the way they communicate, and the way that they educate. So that disruption is being driven by the investment community. If we take an example here of M-Pharma, so in the supply chain part, M-Pharma has attracted funding of about $60 million, and it is transforming access to medicine at the moment in 5 countries. Twiga has raised about $50 million, and it is transforming the way that farmers bring their products to market in Kenya. So these changes are happening primarily in Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, Egypt, Morocco, South Africa, and to a lesser extent, Côte d'Ivoire and so on. But those are the pioneer countries for digital disruption. You will see this disruption happen right the way across the board. Another good company to look at is Uber. So, you know, you're seeing Uber expand into lots of different countries, and that is transformational in the way that people go about their lives, and also how, you know, again, how they choose their products. To give you another example, Jumia, which is the largest internet retailer in Africa, Jumia stocks tens of thousands of products. So anybody with a smartphone in the countries where it operates can see the price of those products, can see the range of those products, and can buy those products. And that is a huge change compared to 3 years ago. And if you're a food company, food companies are now going direct to Jumia and some of the digital disruptors and saying, I don't want a distributor necessarily in Africa. I want you to distribute my products. Or in some cases, the supermarket chains like Carrefour or Tesco are going direct to Jumia and saying, I want you to sell my products. So it is transforming the way that the route to market works. So I was asked before I put this presentation together, what are the top 10 markets? And the answer is It depends. It depends on what you're trying to look at. If you look at GDP in 2025, then the most important markets are the ones on the left. If you look at GDP growth, you get a different list of countries. If you look at ease of doing business and business risks, then it's an entirely new set of countries. And then on the right-hand side are a list of the top 10 countries that we, Trend Type, who we get asked about. What I would say to you is, if you look across that list, I don't think there is a single country that appears in each of those lists. So Nigeria appears in 3 of those lists. South Africa appears in 3 of those lists. No country in its own right stands out in terms of market attractiveness. Generally, Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, Angola, Ghana, these are the biggest economies. They have some of the highest growth and so on. We get asked about this a lot. But to be honest, the most attractive markets depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for low risk, Botswana, Mauritius, Gabon, Morocco, these are all the lower risk countries. If you're looking for explosive growth, Nigeria. As much as anything, I would want you to understand this, that the execution in these markets is more important to some degree than the markets themselves. So we have a customer that is the largest player in its market in Ethiopia. It only operates in 3 markets in Africa, but it is the brand leader in Ethiopia, and it is, a very successful market for this client. But it has no interest in being in Kenya or Tanzania, in Uganda at the moment. So its strategy is to focus on, 1 or 2 large markets, to build a deep partnership, to build a manufacturing facility, and to target the mainstream by being embedded in 1 or 2 countries. That is its strategy. Our experience is that very few companies are good at being in multiple markets right the way across Africa. And that is true even for companies like Nestle, who have been in African markets since the 1920s and the 1930s. Actually, when you look behind those companies, their distribution strategies are still, in some countries, quite weak. So if you're a South African business looking to expand, actually this importance of markets could be very different, because it is proportionally much easier to be in Mozambique from South Africa, or to be targeting Botswana from South Africa, than it is for a South African business to try and target Nigeria or Morocco or Egypt. So the other thing that we say to our customers is, by all means, look at isolated big markets, but also consider a hub and spoke approach, that you might want to be in a cluster of countries, not necessarily in just one. So some markets are more open to being clustered than others. Okay, so we've talked about opportunities. Let's just talk a little bit about the risks. What you're seeing in front of you here is a picture of a major highway in Cameroon in the wet season. And we use this picture to help our customers understand that, when we're talking about market entry, often for some products, it means just the major city, that actually the quality of distribution falls off in the rest of the country. And in the case of Cameroon and other parts of equatorial Africa where, there is heavy rain, some of that problem is being driven by rain and the quality of roads. So the quality of distribution infrastructure in Africa is very variable and often quite poor. And that is one of the many risks that we talk about. that within each country, your physical distribution profile may only be, a city, a few major cities. It may not be the whole country at all. Even so, we talk about things at a country level, but the reality is that those borders were imposed on African people generally by colonial governments. And so actually underneath this picture of 54 countries, you've got a broad spectrum of languages, and you've got lots of trading across borders, and you also have quite different regional preferences even within a country. Now, the best example of that I use is in Nigeria. So northern Nigeria is very Muslim dominant, so very few sales of beer, lots of sales of tea. But also in northern Nigeria, consumers take their cues from other Muslim countries. So they are more likely to look across to Saudi Arabia and look at some of the trends in Saudi Arabia than they are people in southern Nigeria. The other factor that we would lay onto this is language. So people in Anglophone markets like Kenya and Uganda are much more likely to look across to America and England for their inspiration for the products that they're interested in. People in Cameroon or Côte d'Ivoire are more likely to look at France. So those old colonial ties still define some of the appetites in the markets. And you see this really obviously in Francophone West Africa. You go around and the quality of the bakeries and the breads, I could take you to some small towns in Côte d'Ivoire and you would find really good baked bread. But if I take you to a small town in Kenya, the bread will be awful. So those sort of colonial taste preferences and structure of markets still exist even today, even 40, 50 years after independence. So when we talk about markets, there's no one way to look at these markets. You need to put different frames on top of them: religion, language, to look at the borders as being slightly different in terms of how they operate, to look at the capital city and the largest cities to be almost markets in their own right. So risk. There are really there's only one low risk market on the continent of Africa. Mauritius is also a low risk market, but Botswana is the only low risk market in Africa from a trading perspective. Even South Africa is considered by business risk experts to be medium risk. Okay, and some countries like Libya and even Nigeria are considered to be high risk. And this pattern doesn't really change that much at the moment. So if I was to show you this picture from 2 years ago, it would be pretty much the same as today. And there are a wide variety of risks that affect these markets that include trading risks, political risks, economic risks, and also risks like currency risks and so on. Again, the key thing to take away in terms of market attractiveness is you as an organization exporting into these markets, that some of that risk is your risk too. And so, what you see across these markets is that some of the larger, more exciting markets like Nigeria, DRC, they are also high risk markets. So, they will absorb your resources, they will need your time, and they will need a competent route to market strategy for success, because they are not going to become low risk soon. And have a look at the risks. Well, the obvious risks are things like political risks, that that there is a government coup or bad government. There's economic risks like the price of oil falls, or you know, in the case of some countries, very high levels of debt. But there are a whole range of hidden risks that you only find out about, you know, when you're a little bit more familiar with the markets. So the big one here is FX. So this is how you get paid. Okay, you sell your goods in a country in the local currency, but you want to be paid in euros. Okay, that process is complicated in Ethiopia, Angola, Kenya, Cote d'Ivoire, Algeria to some extent. Okay, that process is really complicated because it takes time and it requires, you know, it requires lots of intervention from the central banks, and in some countries it's just almost impossible to do. There are lots of supply chain risks. Some are, you know, seem inconsequential. So, you know, if you want to sell chocolate in a warm climate in Africa, you know, your product is going to need to be refrigerated all the way through its lifetime until the consumer buys it. Okay, if at any point in that process your product is not refrigerated, it will be ruined. And the same is true for dairy products. And the same is true for some other products. Haribo, for example, ships all of its products to Africa at 12 degrees Celsius, no higher than 12 degrees. Okay, so if you think about that process of refrigeration, how many people the product goes through and how much pressure there is on those people to keep the product safe and secure. If you want to run a generator in Africa, it is expensive to do, but in Nigeria, the power is only on for 50% of the time. So, you know, those risks are that you receive reassurances about your product, but actually, you know, it sits on a port in 50 degrees and, you know, and it just gets destroyed. You have the general rules about doing business. You know, there's lots of risks about that. Trademark risks. Algeria is notorious for distributors requesting product, rejecting the product, and then quietly stealing it from the port. So that's a huge problem with businesses in Asia, for example, that send products to Algeria. Okay, and the Algerian distributors will change their names, you know, the names of their business, and you know, and they'll pop up, and then 2 years later they'll do the same thing. So, you know, hidden risks about doing business, and then legal risks, you know, like we say, risks like trademarks, risks as well to do with your agreement with the distributors. So again, we know of a business that stopped doing, you know, stopped trading in Tunisia. They said to their distributor, "Thank you, you've been a great distributor, but we want to change our strategy." And the distributor said, "Well, hold on a sec, you know, you owe me $1 million." And the company said, well, we're not going to give you $1 million. We absolutely don't. And, you know, and that started a 5-year legal battle in a country where, you know, where the brand doesn't really understand, you know, whether it's going to win the court case or not, because it's not obvious. You know, you don't necessarily know the rules of the game. So lots and lots of risks. And I don't want to overemphasize the risks. I just want to say, you know, understand that they're there, understand that they affect how you do business, and that they also impact on your distributors as well. So how do you win in African markets? Well, it's not just by working hard. The first thing is you need to have a local strategy. There's no point sitting in Germany and telling the people who distribute your products in Africa that this is the way it's going to work, and you won't listen to them. Okay, you need to understand that you can't measure everything in African markets, that the insight is probably going to be more important. Okay, you can't go and get AC Nielsen information. You can't get Kantar or IRI information. It's not going to happen. Okay, so insight, the things that you really need to know will be more important than measurement. And also understand that if you've got good relations in South Africa, that's great. But actually Cape Town is further than, you know, some places in Europe. from big African markets. You know, I can fly from London to Lagos in about the same time that it takes someone from Johannesburg to fly to Lagos. The difference is maybe 2 hours. Okay, so someone sitting in Johannesburg has no more idea about Lagos than I do. Okay, and worse, sometimes, you know, South African-based businesses overestimate how easy it is to get into markets. I've talked about FX, so you can have a great sales profile, but you know, your products will leave a factory in Germany, they will arrive in an African market, they'll be sold, and that's sometimes 3 to 5 months during which your products need to be paid for. Okay, and all of that time is a currency risk for somebody. Okay, it's a currency risk. It's a common, you know, it's a really common problem. Perhaps unusually, we say, think like a bank robber. Think like a bank robber. If you're a bank robber and you want to go into a bank, okay, the only thing that matters to you is how to get your money out and how you can make sure that you can spend your money. Everything else about that is almost irrelevant compared to that one thing. So, you know, if we were talking to a group of bank robbers and we say, what's your job? They would say, maybe I go around and I rob banks. But actually they don't. What they do is they take money. And if I was to say to a food exporter, what's your job? They would say, oh, we make really great food products. And that's fine. But actually, you know, when you're thinking about expanding into African markets, the most important thing is, can you get your money out at the other end? So think like a bank robber. Don't lose track of you know, this part of it, the how you're getting paid, and also what that means. Commit to your distributor. Okay, a distributor is a partner. It is a relationship. It is based on trust. It happens at distance. The distributors receive approaches from lots and lots of brands, and everybody says the same thing. We've got a great brand. We want to be in your market. Can you help us? So the distributors don't have to work with you. Okay, what they're looking for is very similar to what, you know, you might look for in a relationship. Can they adapt to what I want? Will they be responsive? Will they listen to me? Will they commit to me? Do they have the same passion as me? Okay, so that's what commitment means. It might seem obvious in amongst market strategy and risk analysis and market assessment, but fundamentally, you know, you are also moving product. And because you are physically moving a product, that might determine which markets are accessible to you, what risks your distributor has, and how that affects the costs that they have and the prices that they have. It definitely will affect the time it takes for your product to get to market, and also, you know, whether your products are out of stock or not, and it may also bring other complexities. So just coming to this point here about out of stocks, you know, it is very, very common to see brands come into a market and then sometimes they just disappear for 2 or 3 months. So your out of stocks are important, because, you know, it's not like Germany where there's a nice conveyor belt that goes between the factory and the supermarket. You know, this is a very long conveyor belt with quite a long amount of time between it. And the decisions that you make 3 months ago affect what happens on the shelf in the market today. Okay, so, you know, it's really worth bearing in mind that you are moving product with a, you know, with a time gap. And that brings me to the end of the presentation. Do you have any questions for me about what market attractiveness means in Africa, how to approach route to market in Africa, or anything that we've covered in this presentation? just see the questions coming through. I'm just trying to. I can see hands coming up. Please fire away if you have a question.
Yeah, I would just start. Thank you very much for your presentation. Henning Krause, Landwirtschaftskammer Niedersachsen. We are more in horticulture products. My question is, how do you combine this like bank robbing attitude, so to say, to get in quickly and get the profit out to a certain extent, with the commitment with the distributors? Like, this one thing is kind of more long-term relationship, and the other one is more like, okay, we try to kind of maximize the opportunities.
Yeah, good question. So when we talk about being a bank robber, we don't mean that you run into the market, you know, and then run out again. What we're really saying is that, you know, that if you think about the process of bank robbing, all the planning that goes into it and so on, that's still part of the process. But you know, what we're saying is that don't leave the process of being paid and how you get paid, don't leave that to the end of the process. You know, it needs to be right at the front of the process. And you know, particularly when you're working with distributors, you know, for the distributors, this business of payment and risk determines the margins that they look for and the pricing that they set in the market. So, you know, how you approach risk and payment and cash flow and stocks, all of those things actually determine your relationship with the distributor. So I'm being very flippant when I talk about being a bank robber, but really the point is to emphasize that, you know, that maybe in Germany, that your job is to talk about how great your products are and all the rest of it. But that's because the payment process is easy and it's risk-free. But in African markets, your job is also to get paid. Okay. I'm not sure I can see any questions at the moment. Can anyone else see questions for me? We have a hand up from.
I think
Hello.
There's a question of Gerd.
Yes. Hello, Ben.
Hi.
I have two short questions. First one is, when you are at exhibitions, you often meet importers which are only importing for duty-free areas or governmental areas. What's your opinion about it? And the second one is, you have spoken about the effects of former colonies from France and from Great Britain for the structure of market and for the products which are bought in that market. Do you see similar effects in Cameroon, Togo, or other German former colonies, or is that effect lower?
Great question. So, no, we don't see so much of an impact for Germany, to be honest. You know, the reality is, because of apartheid in South Africa, that South African businesses basically developed, you know, a lot of brands that were co-owned with European businesses, that they cut the connection between Europe and South Africa. So actually, you know, for South Africa and Namibia particularly, there is almost just a kind of little South African universe with a different, you know, a different sort of weight of brands and so on. And that doesn't really reflect back on anything sort of colonial back into Europe. And South Africa was largely independent in terms of how it produced its own food and so on. So you know, South Africa is, from the point of view of food export, is almost like another colonial power in Southern Africa. So you see, you know, South African taste preferences in Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and so on. But this process of sort of French, particularly sort of French taste preferences, really shows itself in francophone markets. And particularly in North Africa, you know, really strong connection between Marseille and Morocco and North Africa. You know, you just see lots of movement of people between these places, lots of ad hoc trading, and also, of course, just lots of French businesses feel very comfortable operating between those two. So yeah, you do see it a lot. You asked another question about free trade areas and so on. When you meet people at trade shows and they call themselves an importer, normally they are looking to have an extremely transactional relationship with the easiest possible sale, and if possible, potentially never ever taking title of the product. So often all they really want to do is to sit between a buyer and a seller of food, and they want that process to be as easy as possible. Yeah, I think generally it's just, if you're selling rice, maybe it's fine. If you're selling maybe milk powder, it's fine. But for everything else where you might need something more than just a commodity, I don't really see them as particularly useful. And obviously, they look to the free trade areas because it just makes for an easier sale for them.
Okay.
Thank you.
No worries. Any other questions?
Yeah, maybe I had another one. Ben, thank you so much. First of all, maybe can you give us an idea about competition from other regions like Asia or India into Africa, which is A, and B, maybe what you think about the European retail chains in Africa? Like, there are maybe options we had from Germany to enter African markets via European retail chains. Is that a chance, or how do you see about that? Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. Okay, so let's maybe talk about three countries that are sort of big operators in African markets. So China, Turkey, and India. The Chinese businesses are putting a lot of investment into infrastructure. So China has something called the Belt and Road Initiative, and right the way across Africa is building roads, railways, and football stadiums, hospitals, everything. You also find Chinese traders. So increasingly we see Chinese supermarkets opening up in certain countries, and some of these supermarkets are really big, and primarily that interest from Chinese traders is for non-food goods, so particularly things like clothes and plastic homewares, and maybe to some degree sort of cheaper electronics. So to give you an example, Chinese traders dominate the clothing trade in Lesotho, for example, and are very unpopular because of it. On the food side, no, we don't really see that much, and that's partly because we just don't generally see that much Chinese exported food, at least not finished products. And also, if I'm honest, because I don't think African consumers really trust Chinese-made food. For India, it's different, and in some countries, Indian origin or ethnic Indian people run distribution. So ethnic Indians run distribution in Kenya and to some degree in Uganda and Tanzania. And ethnic Indian traders are very important in places like the Gambia and Sierra Leone, and even in Nigeria as well. And where you find ethnic Indian traders, you also find a route back into India. And where India is very successful is that because it is more advanced than most African markets, it has a broader range of affordable and cheap products. So if you go into markets in Nigeria, for example, you will find lots of sort of cookies and sort of snacks and that kind of thing that have been developed for Indian markets, and they're very, very low price, and they're well suited for African markets because they're cheap. So yes, we see a lot of Indian products starting to come in, particularly at this very low level, not at premium level, no real Indian products at premium level, but at the cheapest levels, absolutely. So then Turkish products. Turkey is a huge investor in African markets. So it's a huge investor in Libya, for example. It's a big investor in Ethiopia. And part of the Turkish investment strategy is also to sell finished products. So particularly things like canned tomatoes, for example. But increasingly, chocolate is a product where we see a lot of Turkish activity. You see a lot of Turkish activity at trade fairs generally, but particularly for high quality finished products. So what Turkish exporters are looking to do is to really enter packaged food in a strong way. Not so much in dairy, but particularly in sort of canned foods and chocolate and cookies to some degree. You see a lot of Turkish products. There are also there's a big Turkish retailer called BİM. So BİM was modelled on Lidl. So the guys that set up BİM in 1980 or 1990, they all were ex Lidl employees, and they basically took exactly what Lidl does in Germany, and they made it into a retail chain in Turkey. Well, BİM operates in Morocco and Egypt, and it's got hundreds of stores in each of those countries. And again, lots of Turkish products come in that way. Ralf, you asked a question about European supermarkets. Yes, we do see a lot of European supermarket activity, primarily from French retail chains and primarily through partners. So Carrefour is very big in Egypt and Kenya through its Middle Eastern partner. So that's a company called Majid Al Futtaim. So Majid Al Futtaim runs Carrefour stores across the Middle East, and it's got stores, lots of stores in Egypt and Kenya and Uganda. On the West Coast, Carrefour has a franchise with a company called CFAO. CFAO is a big distributor across West Africa. It is now owned by the Toyota car company. So it's primarily a vehicle distributor, but they've been in Africa for sort of 60 years, and they build shopping malls and everything. And that's Carrefour's partner in West Africa. In North Africa, Casino and Carrefour, both very, very strong in Tunisia and Morocco. And Casino has a long relationship with a big distribution chain in West Africa, and so there are sort of Casino stores in Francophone West Africa as well. The other player that's quite big is Auchan. So Auchan only operates in sort of 2 markets in Africa, and of those, Senegal is its most important, and it is by far and away the biggest retailer in Senegal. So you do find that European retailers are present in these markets, but they are still, they're still a small part relatively of the distribution chain, apart from in North Africa. So in Morocco and Tunisia, very, very important. Outside of that, somewhat important.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Ben. I don't know if there are any further questions for Ben Longman right now. It's your chance. Otherwise, I don't know, Ben, we'll continue now in German, as you know, with Mr. Bröker. And will you be able to join us at the end for the final discussion again, or is that tricky with your timetable?
No, that is fine. I will come off camera and I will let Mr. Bröker give his presentation, and thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Ben, and maybe if at the final discussion you can give us some ideas what Trend Type can offer us and our members.